Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com. In today's episode, I wanted to talk about conflicts of interest and just multiple conflicts of interest with the Big Four accounting firms. Not only from a client perspective, where you have the standard conflict of interest, where the Big Four accounting firms might be auditing a company but they also might be providing some consulting or tax services on the side. And so there's a risk that they audit their work, or they just take it easy on the client in general as far as the audit goes, because they want to continue as the auditor. And this happens all the time. And that's why we see a lot of these scandals happen, is because the Big Four accounting firms don't apply pressure. And this is where we see a lot of the issues in the everyday work of the Big Four accounting firms. And this affects the way you work in the Big Four accounting firms, because you're only allowed to apply pressure so far to the client to get your answer. And typically the client gets fed up and they can complain to partners, or you hit a deadline. And so I think this represents a continued risk for the Big Four accounting firms, existence, as they run into these bigger and bigger scandals. And we'll keep an eye on the Evergrande scandal in China and see how big that gets for PwC. But I was just thinking about conflicts of interest in general, and how I just see so many conflicts of interest for the Big Four accounting firms, because I was thinking about the Big Four accounting firms, and really what they are is it's basically they're in the business of conflict of interest, because you hire the Big Four accounting firms when you need an outside opinion or an outside workforce, but you really want to validate your opinion. Rarely are the Big Four accounting firms hired to come in and completely tear something apart and say, tell us everything that's wrong. And that does happen. Let's say you're doing a restatement of an auditor that you're replacing, or you're actually coming in for a consulting project to improve processes. And that's where that happens. But a lot of times it's just validation of the status quo, or somebody's in a crunch and they just need the Big Four accounting firms. And another area where I was thinking of a conflict of interest with the Big Four accounting firms is government. So the Big Four accounting firms are closely tied with government. And as government budgets get bigger and bigger in the US and around the globe, Big Four accounting firms are going to be more conflicted, because they want the governments to spend more money, because they know they're going to get a piece of that, either directly from the governments, as we've seen with the Big Four accounting firms in the U.S. with unemployment programs, all the COVID stuff. I mean, in U.S. and Australia, where they're just getting these humongous contracts and had growth during the COVID-19 period from government contracts. But also, those governments will also give money to contractors, and those contractors will then hire the Big Four accounting firms on top of that. So that's a big risk as well, a conflict of interest, I feel. And if you look in their press releases, or not press releases, but their financial reports every year, you can see this. For example, in this year in Deloitte's report, and I was looking over this for just studying what they had in it, they have a section on public policy. And they have a section on there that talking about how they advocate for the government, or they advocate the government, they lobby them basically. But they say that they're doing this to make a financial reporting ecosystem that's safe, transparent, and accountable. And although I do agree that they try and influence policy from that perspective, I think they're also in there influencing for bigger government programs so that they can get more money out of it, because Big Four accounting firms make a lot of money off these governments. So I think that's another conflict of interest. And I'm just talking, here about risks. And then I was also looking through Deloitte's year-end report, and I saw this chart of risks that they had. And it's a very high-level risk matrix. And it's more politically correct than anything, because I think they are missing some risks in here. And one of the ones they talk about is audit quality and loss of public trust due to significant failure to execute high-quality audits across the organization. And that mixed with conduct, they say that they could have unethical behavior. So I feel like those two are, capture conflict of interest. And, another one that was pretty interesting in there is activism. They say that the internal or external activism could impair the perception of Deloitte's brand and its reputation as a purpose-led organization. And I would agree to that as well, that, activists could impact the big four accounting firms. I'm actually shocked that they're aware enough to see that in there. But I think it's a conflict of interest that could create that. And it's also for Deloitte, with the unemployment work that they've done, and where they haven't done that great of a job in certain states. I think they're conflicted because they just keep winning these policies, they keep winning these contracts, and they don't necessarily do the best job. So I think there's a lot of conflict of interest issues with the big four accounting firms, where they become enmeshed with these clients and the governments, and they rely on them. Basically, what I'm saying is they're relying on the success of these firms, and they sort of attach themselves to them. And since it's a constant flow of money, then they don't want to become detached from them. So you're on an audit client, and you're just you're trying to keep the status quo, keep things running the way they are. Even if something goes bad, like if the company gets in a bad spiral, you try and make it look good because you hope they can stay in business and keep paying the bills, versus stepping back and saying, maybe this isn't the client for us, or at the government maybe saying that they should step away from a proposal to the government. So I think this poses some risk. And as the big four accounting firms get bigger, and bigger companies get bigger, and governments get bigger, the conflicts of interest are going to get bigger, and the exposure to potential risk is going to get bigger. And I think the perfect case is this Evergrande case, and we'll see what comes from that. But also, KPMG and with the Carillion, they're not able to live that down, and we see article after article every day that quotes that. So I think the big four accounting firms need to be more cognizant of it. People who work there need to be more cognizant of it. And I think the big four accounting firms need to detach. They don't need to perfectly align with every governmental initiative out there, or push, like, for example, the climate change. I was reading through Deloitte's stance on climate change, and I'll probably cover that in a different podcast. But it's like they link to all these websites, and it's not really clear what they're doing. And any progress that they've made over the past couple of years with regards to their own carbon footprint was because people stayed at home for COVID. So basically, they're outsourcing their carbon footprint. And so I think the big four accounting firms are pushing a lot of this stuff because it's a new initiative that is different from the status quo. So it means more work from them. They don't really care one way or the other, and I don't really see that they're making progress. I'll talk about that in a different podcast. But they attach to the government, and they push anything that the government pushes and says it's great, and we're working with all these governmental organizations to make the world a better place, without questioning anything, without questioning the reasonableness, without pushing back, without saying whether the metrics are actually useful and helpful. It's more of, you can see in the way they're preparing their documents as well, that they're gaming the system. And I think they see an potential there, because they already help, massaging numbers and saying things are good when they're not, with certain financial statements. So I think they see a potential to, and also the numbers of disclosures. The more disclosures you have to make, let's say now we're stepping away from financial disclosures and into environmental disclosures, the more things that need to get quote unquote audited or prepared, and there's more work for them. But whether or not that's actually going to change the world, we'll have to see. But that's what I wanted to talk about today, was the conflicts of interest of the big four accounting firms as they get more integrated into large corporations and government. I see them growing, and I see the potential for bigger scandals to shake them up growing as well. So that's what I wanted to talk about. But that's the podcast for today. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast to get future updates, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening.